Okay, I misspoke when I got ready to stop the video. This will be the fourth segment, not the third segment. But we're going to talk about, we're moving into glucose metabolism now. And how do we get ATP? So we're going to talk about glycolysis and Krebs cycle and all of that good stuff. But let's talk about, let's circle back to when we were talking about bodybuilding and weightlifters and people who work out regularly and diet in a certain fashion, and how we watch those macronutrients. And we mentioned those in the last lecture for a reason, so we're going to circle back and kind of link that in. So what we need to know is that glucose is the main substance that provides our body with energy. First of all, our brains run exclusively off of glucose. That's why when our blood sugars are low, we get real fuzzy headed, we're not lucid. If they drop extremely low, we can actually kind of go into like a coma because our brain stops functioning. And other parts of our body can use, all the other cells in our body can use glucose, but they also can utilize other forms of energy, but our brains can only use glucose. So that's a very important reason why we need glucose. Now, we break down glucose into certain biomolecules, and we'll talk about those here in a second, and we break down other forms of macronutrients into the same biomolecules, but the system that we use to do that, to break down fats and to break down proteins, is a lot less energy efficient than glycolysis, the process that we use to break down glucose and utilize that for energy. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, okay? So we know that glucose, we said, is our main source of energy production, and it's used to generate ATP, which we said was our currency, or our currency system, or our monetary system of cellular energy. And glucose really packs a big punch because one molecule of glucose, one single molecule of glucose, once it runs through all the proper cycles that we're going to outline, can give us a little payoff of about 36 ATP. 36 ATP. When we don't have glucose available, as I mentioned, we can use carbs and we can use fats and we can use proteins to break those down to generate ATP when glucose molecules are not readily available. Now, what happens when we have too much glucose, for those of us who are eating frequently or large amounts or have a net caloric intake that's well above what we need in a day, is when we can't use the glucose, we shunt that into fat. So that's why really sugary diets are not healthy for us, why they cause us to gain weight and contribute to overall obesity rates, etc. So there's my little doctor's pitch for low sugar diets. But some sugars are needed, and we get those sugars naturally in food. We don't necessarily have to add sugar to our diet and candy and soda and sugar packets in our coffee. We can get those from fruits and starches and other things as well. Now, let's take a look here. ATP, we're just pointing out that ATP can be used to do cellular work, right? ATP is needed to run that sodium-potassium pump. ATP is needed to break things down and put things together. ATP is needed to ship mass quantities of stuff out of a cell. So we need ATP to survive, and we need to be able to make ATP to be able to do this cellular work. Now, I threw this slide in here. This is extra. This is not going to be in your PowerPoint presentation. So I don't know if it's possible to take a screenshot, or I'll be happy to post this image. I'll just go ahead and do that, post this image. But there's a whole class, a whole field of study on biochemistry. Biochemistry is these chemical reactions that happen in relation to metabolic processes in our body. And I just want to bring this slide in because it's a nice depiction of what it is I'm trying to convey to you. Here are our macronutrients. I'm going to write that down. We called them, the beginning of this last lecture, we were talking about macronutrients. Okay? Now we need sugar. We need glucose, right? That's our target molecule. And you can see glucose is here. Glucose is here. And we eat fats and carbs and protein. And when we're following some type of a metabolic diet regime, we're monitoring our fat intake, carb intake, protein intake. Each of these have, each for one protein, one carbo, and one fat, each have different caloric levels. So it takes more calories burned to burn a fat or a protein or a carb, okay? And I don't remember offhand what those are. If you work out a lot or diet or heavy into dieting or nutrition, you'll know. But offhand, I can't quite remember what it is. But what I want to show you is that carbohydrates are actually just really long chains of sugars. Just really long chains of sugars in essence. And we break those down pretty readily into glucose. Immediately we start chopping those up, and it provides us with a very steady, very quickly accessible stream of glucose. This is why runners who need extra energy, extra ATP, will do like a carb load before they do a marathon, because they're wanting to supply their body with these extra carbs that they can quickly and readily break down for glucose, all right? Now, you can see off the side here, when you look at fats and proteins, there's no nice arrow that comes in here. There's no nice arrow that comes in here because we're not able to break them down in the same way that we break down carbs. And it's a slower process. We have to go through these other means. Now, proteins are made of amino acids, and those are strings of 3 nucleotides, okay? 3 nucleotides. N is probably not the right thing to use in here, so let me fix this up. So we talked about the nucleotides briefly when we were talking about DNA in the nucleus. And so we've got, say, maybe we've got the C or the G or the A or the T, right? Thymine, cytosine, guanine, adenine. These are our nucleotides. And these are, remember, these are nucleotides in DNA. And so it's deoxyribonucleic acids. And so also in here, there's some nitrogen inside of here, nitrogen. Now, nitrogen is toxic to us in its free form. We have to get rid of nitrogen. So what we do is we break these proteins down, we collect up these amino acids. We have to send these nitrogen out through the urea cycle so that we end up urinating this out, right? Through the kidneys and the urea cycle, and these nitrogen get expelled somehow. And we use these amino acids, and they go into an amino acid pool. And that pool can be used, we either reutilize those amino acids to build proteins for our body, structural proteins, or we break them down through a process called gluconeogenesis, at which point so let's just look at the Latin of this word. This is not something you have to remember. I'm just explaining this for your understanding. So gluco means sugar, neo means new, and generate means to make, genesis. So basically gluconeogenesis means to make new sugars, all right? So we're sending these amino acids through gluconeogenesis, at which point we will get glucose, but it doesn't come in the form of glucose like this up here. What it does is it comes in a smaller component that we send into the same direction as we would typically send into the glucose. And so it kind of goes in here, okay? Now on the fat side, let's get rid of all of this over here. On the fat side, we have to do some more work, right? Remember, this is our readily very, very quick process. We eat carbs, we cleave carbs. Say our carbohydrate is a long chain of sugars that looks like this. We just get in here and we snip them apart, and all of these little glucose sugars fall into here, and it's that quick and simple. So this is our quick burn solution. Proteins we saw on this side, much, much slower. Lots we got to do over here in order to get to this point. And then on the fat side, we do the same thing. We have to break these fats down into glycerol and free fatty acid. We then ship it down here into fatty acid pools. Some of our tissues can metabolize it, others cannot. We then take everything extra and we put it into fat stores. This is literally the fat around our bellies and our hips and our thighs. When we start to gain weight, our fat stores. When we need it, when we're low on glucose and we need to pull from fat, remember this is the person that's been out in the wilderness for a couple days now. We go through a process called lipolysis. Lysis means to break. We talked about that already when we were lysing cells. Lipo means fat, or refers to fat cells. So the process of lipolysis in general refers to breaking down of fat. And when we go through lipolysis, then we get some more free fatty acids. And these can all be used to eventually lead back into this pool as well. And then once we get it in here, and this one in here, then it all can be utilized in metabolism and the generation of ATP. But you can see why our preference is to break down sugar, right? Because it's faster than the process of breaking down fats and proteins here on the left and the right side. All right, so that's just an idea to show you sort of. And then if you were a biochemist, you would literally study all of the chemical processes in these pathways like ad nauseum. You would just be tired of it, and it's quite exhausting. We're going to study one, and you'll see the work involved and kind of have an idea from there. Okay, so I will post this just for your reference. I won't test on this. You won't need to know where proteins go, where fats go. You'll just need to know kind of once we have glucose as our product, what do we do with it in order to come up with ATP? And we're going to talk about that now. We're going to start talking about that now and finish up later if we need to. So, glucose, what we do is we take glucose in the presence of oxygen, right, in an anaerobic, no, I'm sorry, let me correct myself here, an aerobic environment, which means that we have oxygen present, and we take glucose and oxygen and we put it through a process called cellular respiration. It says right there for you, cellular respiration. Cross it out. And when we're done, we get carbon dioxide and water, okay? So that you need to know. You need to know that in cellular respiration, we start with glucose and oxygen, we go through cellular respiration, and we end up with carbon dioxide and water, okay? So you need to know that for your exam. And then, when we do that, the energy that we acquire through this process, we get 36 ATP. Now that ATP is put into use in the cell for what we call cellular work, and the energy is released. And remember, the energy is released because we take this we take this ATP, we take off a phosphate, and the breaking of that high energy bond there provides us with energy, and we're left with ADP, right? So I'm going to keep harping that on to you guys so that we remember. ATP, break apart that high energy phosphate bond, and we get ADP. So once we send our ATP into the cell and it's used in cellular work, as in anabolism, transport, muscle contractions, etc., everywhere that we use ATP in our body, then the ATP, we're now left with 36 ADP and 36 phosphates. If we break down 36 ATP, we're left with 36 ADP and 36 phosphates. And then we feed these back into the cycle of cellular respiration along with some glucose and some oxygen. And at the end of cellular respiration, we're left with carbon dioxide and water and 36 ATP. All right, so that's the general idea. This I want you to memorize. And actually, I think we're going to stop here for today because I want you just to know that this is the process we use for aerobic respiration. It's called cellular respiration. You must have oxygen present. You feed glucose and oxygen into the system with ADP and phosphates. And coming out of the system, you get byproducts, carbon dioxide and water, and it generates for use 36 ATP. 36 ATP. okay? And that's off of one glucose molecule. One glucose molecule. All right, so we're going to stop there for today, and we will continue on Monday talking about the steps of cellular respiration. And there are 4 stages that we're going to cover: glycolysis, preparatory step, citric acid cycle, and the electron transport system. Electron transport system, this is what our mitochondria is famous for, and how that all leads to us acquiring ATP, which then of course we use in the body to perform all of our cellular functions. This makes us human, it makes us survive, this is how we can live. So we're going to talk about this cellular respiration, super important, and we're going to learn and be tested on those steps. All right, so we're going to stop here for today. Hopefully everybody has a great weekend, and I will see you